Now, AWS, this is a global infrastructure map. So this keeps on updating as they keep on adding more regions, availability centers. If you see here, AWS has got lots of different regions, and we'll learn more in detail as to what a region is, what these availability zones are. But the data centers are divided into different regions. So you've got the US region, you've got Australia region, you've got India, Asia Pacific region, all these different regions. The way in which AWS stores data is very isolated. So if one region goes down, you will have a separate region which can help you bring your data back. There are different sort of costs associated with it, maintaining a high availability over regions. But the AWS has those features. AWS regions, each region will be having multiple availability zones. There are edge locations, so which provides low latency services to any application. So if you have launched an application which have let's say more people in Africa, and you want to launch a service which is uh, whose target customers are living in Africa, then you can put in that sort of edge location there, and it will provide a very low latency services to that region. Now there are multiple sorts of regions you can choose from the AWS console, and we'll be looking at these as well. You can choose from the AWS console where you want to set up your AWS instances, which region do you want to work with. Not all services are region specific. Some of the services like IAM, they do not have a region associated with them, so they are on global infrastructure. So some of the names of the regions are, as you can see here, like you've got the US East region, you've got US West, there are a couple of Asia Pacific ones, you've got Europe region, all these different regions. All this is based on where you are instantiating your infrastructure, whether it's your compute instances or whether it's your storage. So you can define as to which region do you want to store it. So most of the AWS regions are region scoped. That means you can define which region you want to start them. Now, if you need to launch a new application, where should you do it? So there are 4 factors which you should be considering. One is your compliance with the data governance and legal requirements. So, for example, if you have a banking, let's say if it's a US bank, it might be a legal requirement for those banks to store data within US itself. So they will have to choose only the US region here. But if it's a requirement that if it's not a requirement, they can store data. They can select any region across. Proximity to the servers and customers is important because of the latency, as to time taken to access a website or a server. The available services within a region, not all features are available in every region. So if you're using, let's say, new services like speech to text, that might only be available in US region. So it might not be available in Australia. So if you're using that sort of services, you can choose that region. And also pricing varies from region to region. And the pricing is very transparent in AWS. So you can have most of the pricing are pretty much written on the front pages of the service. There's also AWS calculator that you can use to calculate the pricing in advance. Or there's something called as availability zones. So each region has got multiple availability zones. So for example, AP Southeast will have 3 different availability zones here. So which is your Southeast 2A, 2B, and 2C. So what does it mean by an availability zone? So availability zone, it's a sort of separate data centers. They will be having their own power source, own networking, own connectivity. The advantage of storing your data across the different availability zone is that if one zone goes down, then your data can be serviced from another zone. So most of the cloud-based application that you would see, they will have multiple availability zones configured. Not only it's the best practice to have your your application configured across zones, but also it's very, very essential because AWS, let's say, promises that your data centers will be available at 99.9% of the time, but there is still 0.1%, which might be, let's say, a few hours of downtime that AWS allows. Might be to upgrade their own servers, might be to upgrade their infrastructure. So you have to take care of that you deploy it in multiple zones. Now, your application do not need to switch from one zone to another manually. It all happens automatically in the background. So we'll learn more about how the load balancers operate and how the traffic can automatically switch. Okay. Also, AWS has got edge locations. So there are 216 edge locations. They keep on increasing. So AWS would never ask, or nobody in the interview would ask as to how many points of presence or how many regions are currently available. But all you have to do is understand that the edge locations are the end. They are the endpoints where the low latency of the traffic can be determined. So if you have, as I said earlier, if you have users in Africa, you would select an edge location near to that. Most of the time, if you select, there's a service called as CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. If you select CDN will automatically determine where the user is connecting from. You don't need to actually provide an edge location corresponding to the traffic. It all happens automatically. So many things in AWS, they're being taken care of by the provider itself. So you don't need to configure many things manually in here. So there are lots of things which happen automatically. You just need to use the service. All right. Now VPC is this is the crux of how how an account in AWS operates. So inside the region, inside each region there is a virtual private cloud. So this is your boundary of your AWS. So everything that you store in would be residing in within the VPC. Of course, there are some services which are which will stay apart from VPC. They're not VPC dependent, but all your compute instances, all your databases, your data, your application layer, your web layer, most of these would be residing within VPC itself. But there are some services in AWS which are outside the VPC. We'll be looking at that in later slides. But to just try to understand that you within your region there is a boundary called as VPC, and all your services within that will be in the virtual private cloud. Now, once you have your VPC, there's a concept of availability zone. So as I said, that one VPC can have multiple availability zone. And within those availability zones, we have subnets. So all your application, they will be residing in some sort of subnet. So if your application is public facing, they'll be stored within the public subnet. If they are private facing, they'll be in private subnet. So subnets these are logical partitions in which you place your application. So you can define what sort of networking a subnet will allow. You can define what sort of ports will be open in the subnet. You can define what sort of inflow and outflow of the traffic. You can define whether an application whether an application will deny certain sort of traffics using NACLs. So there are lots of different firewalls that can be provided using subnets. But this is how the hierarchy looks like. So you've got region, you've got VPC. Inside VPC, you will have availability zones, and then you will have subnets. So this is the basic layout of all the cloud infrastructure.
Just to add there, so this is basically how you would have seen, like, how all these previous slides, if you look them again, they are all sort of related to each other. So you need to understand what a region is, what availability zone, what edge location are, and then these will be frequently used throughout the bootcamp and throughout your career also. and a good understanding of that is required. Also, when you look at VPC structure, because this is a sort of networking you are going to create. So it relates to that shared responsibility model that Saurabh shared earlier. So AWS will allow you to create resources. You can request compute, you can request storage, database, but it's your responsibility to secure it. It's your responsibility to manage some of those aspects. So this is how you do it. You start with the networking concepts, with creating your own VPC, which is your own boundary that you are creating for your resources. Who can come inside, who can go outside, what data, what port to use, you will define that. So that's how you manage. If you don't manage it properly, your security posture will not be proper, and there are chances that somebody may attack, somebody may uh, mine Bitcoin or any sort of thing that happens in the cloud frequently. You are exposing yourself to that. So this is how it relates to the shared responsibility model. AWS allows you to do certain things, but you do it properly through these services.
Yep. And it's many of the attacks do happen because these services are not configured correctly. If you there are principles in which using which you have to put in those sort of applications within a public or a private subnet. If you have misconfigured it, all your data can be accessed by anybody on the public. So it's very important to understand these concepts on public and private subnets, how the traffic flows. We'll be discussing it in future as well, but you'll have to really understand how these subnets behave and how the traffic flows. All right. So within the region, so we have got all these different availability zones. You've got these different data centers. So if you have placed your application in any of those availability zones, they can be redundant. So you have to put it into multiple availability zones so that they can be made highly available. So if you look at this diagram, so you've got your region, you've got VPC in here, you've got different availability zones. Now within availability zones, you've got private and public subnets, and then similarly your private and public subnets in here. Slowly you will have to start understanding all these diagrams as you go. This might be a little bit complex if you have just started it, so I'll not go too much in detail. But once you have a fair understanding of what all the subnets are and what are the compute instances, what load balancing is, then we'll revisit these type of diagrams towards probably the end of the bootcamp. We'll have a look at multiple different postures and multiple different diagrams and explain them in detail. Maybe not today. All right. Now this is going a little bit of deep dive. So, and it's a good point now that if anybody has got any questions on regions, zones.
There was one question, sort of in the chat.
Yeah, I can't see the chat.
Yeah, I'm just reading it out.
Yeah.
There was question that there was a reference, IAC pass, and there's a question that what is middleware and runtime?
Where do we see that? Is it in?
No, the previous one.
Oh, this one. Okay. Middleware and, or is it like the difference between middleware and runtime?
No, what are these components? Like some overview as to some layer that sits between operating system and your application. So that sort of concept.
Oh, yep. So you've got to operate. Yeah. So you've got your operating system. Your middleware is your business logic. So your application business logic, and your runtime is at the time of running. So you can have, let's say, serverless traffic. So that constitutes your runtime. So so whenever you are running an application, if it's a serverless application, then you just need to bring in your function and then execute it at the runtime.
Something like Java virtual machine or something you need before an application can run, you need a runtime to enable that. So if you are running a .NET application, you would need your platform to have a .NET runtime, a Java runtime to run Java application. Middleware Nginx or middleware, some additional application that enables your application to run. So it's not just your just the application, but some component between the application and operating system that enables your application.